A woman walked into a bank with $12,000 in earned income and left with 2 police officers at her side. It wasn't because she broke the law, but because she didn't look like someone who could own success. They didn't know she had trained their staff. She built their protocols. When the footage hit the internet, Monica Ellison didn't just go viral. She sparked a national reckoning the banking world couldn't ignore. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move, challenge, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. It was just after 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning when Monica Ellison stepped through the revolving glass doors of Briarwood National Bank in uptown Charlotte. The marble floor gleamed beneath her heeled boots, the kind of sterile polish that screamed of corporate pride. She carried a black leather satchel, nothing flashy, just practical, resting heavy against her side. Inside, carefully bundled, were stacks of cash totaling $12,000, the week's earnings from her growing financial consultancy, Ellison Strategies. Monica had been to plenty of banks in her career, but today was different. She wasn't walking in to train staff or deliver a keynote. Today she was simply a customer, a black woman with money to deposit and a tight schedule. And yet, in those first few steps she could already feel it like static in the air before a storm. The lobby was half full. A few suited professionals tapped impatiently on phones. A mother hushed a fussy toddler. At the counter, behind polished glass and a forced smile, stood a young white teller named Brian. He looked up as Monica approached, eyes flickering briefly to her face, then to the satchel in her hand. Something changed in his expression. Not fear, not quite, but a hesitance, a tightening behind the eyes. "Good morning," Monica said warmly. "I need to make a deposit into my business account." Brian nodded, his customer service smile slipping into place. "Of course. Do you have an account number?" She handed him the slip and then unzipped the bag, pulling out the cash stacked, rubber-banded, clean. No $100 bills, mostly 20s and 50s, counted and organized. It was how many of her small business clients paid her in person in cash. As soon as the money hit the counter, Brian's fingers paused on the keyboard. His smile faded. "Excuse me a moment," he said, standing quickly. She watched him walk over to the manager's desk, lean in close and whisper something. The manager, a sharp-jawed woman in her 40s with a tight bun and tighter posture, glanced over at Monica. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then widened as Brian held up the deposit envelope. Monica's pulse ticked up. It was subtle but unmistakable. She'd seen that look before, not of suspicion but of projection, of assumption. She had trained bankers for years on how to avoid that look. And now here she was on the receiving end. When the manager finally approached, it was with the tone of someone pretending everything was fine while preparing for the worst. "Ma'am," she said, "do you mind stepping over here with me for just a few moments? We need to run a quick verification on the funds." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Verification? It's just protocol with large cash deposits. I'm sure you understand. I've deposited larger amounts at other branches of this bank," Monica said calmly. "Never had to step aside before." The manager blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "It'll only take a minute." Reluctantly, Monica followed her toward a smaller side room. No windows, just a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a surveillance camera quietly blinking red. The door clicked shut behind her. She pulled out her license, business cards, tax documentation, and the banking papers she always carried. Her hands were steady but her stomach churned. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then the door opened again, not with the manager but 2 uniformed police officers. One of them wore a confused expression. The other already had his hand resting near his hip. "Miss Ellison?" the first officer asked. She didn't flinch. "Yes. We were called to respond to a possible fraudulent transaction. The bank staff says the funds may be linked to suspicious activity." She stared at him, then laughed softly, not out of humor but disbelief. "You're investigating me for depositing my earnings into my own business account? We just need to ask a few questions." Monica sat straighter. "Officers, before you say another word, I want you to know exactly who I am." She handed over her credentials. Her business card read Monica Ellison, founder and CEO, Ellison Strategies, Financial Empowerment for Underserved Communities. The next card, a badge from the National Association of Banking Compliance Professionals, where she had spoken just 3 months ago on anti-money laundering protocols. "I used to train this bank staff," she said, voice low and unshaken. "Some of the people I mentored probably still work here. I've testified in 3 hearings on equitable banking. So, while you're standing here asking me about money I earned, I need you to know something. Your colleagues have sat through hours of workshops taught by me on exactly this kind of profiling." The room went silent. The first officer looked down at the documents, then back up. "Ma'am, I believe you. I'm sorry. This wasn't our call." "No," Monica said quietly. "But you answered it." The moment was caught on camera, not just bank surveillance but a smartphone in the hands of a customer sitting near the glass door of the office. She hadn't realized they'd been recording. But it was there, the image of a black woman sitting calmly, dignity intact, as 2 officers stood above her in a bank lobby for daring to look out of place with too much cash. By the time she left the bank, the manager hadn't even offered an apology, just a thank you for your patience through clenched teeth. Monica didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw a scene. She simply packed her papers, zipped her bag and walked out without another word. That night, the video surfaced on social media with the caption, "This woman got the cops called on her for depositing her own money. Wait until you hear who she really is." The post took off like wildfire. And in that moment, the banking world had no idea that the woman they profiled would become the face of a reckoning they'd been avoiding for far too long. By the time Monica Ellison returned to her apartment that evening, the video had already amassed over 80,000 views. She hadn't posted it. A woman named Cynthia Enuan, a school teacher from Atlanta who had been in the lobby that morning, had been the one who uploaded it. Her caption was sharp and restrained. "This is Monica Ellison. She was profiled at Briarwood National for depositing her own money. I Googled her after I saw the cops walk in. You should too." That last line, "you should too," became a digital matchstick. Monica didn't sleep much that night. Her phone pulsed with messages. Colleagues, clients, strangers. Some wanted to express outrage. Others shared their own versions of being dismissed, doubted, or dehumanized. It was exhausting but not unfamiliar. Monica had built her entire life on walking a tightrope. Professional enough not to intimidate, assertive enough to be taken seriously, disarming enough to avoid being seen as a threat. Now she was at the center of a storm she never intended to spark. What most people didn't know, what Briarwood never thought to ask, was how far Monica had come to be sitting at that teller counter in the first place. She wasn't someone who stumbled into financial literacy by accident. Her journey began in South Philadelphia, where her mother had cleaned houses and raised 3 kids on her own. Monica remembered watching her mother stretch every paycheck like a miracle. She remembered when eviction notices were a real threat and when her only escape was books borrowed from the public library down the street. She earned her first scholarship at 16. Her second took her to Wharton. By 24 she had earned her MBA and a reputation as someone who didn't just understand numbers. She understood people. She could talk to CEOs and grandmothers with the same ease. She turned that gift into a mission to bridge the gap between institutions and the communities they routinely overlooked. Her firm, Ellison Strategies, wasn't a flashy consultancy. It operated from a modest co-working space, but it made a real difference. She worked with barbershop owners, hairstylists, food truck vendors, single parents running Etsy shops out of their kitchens. She gave them financial fluency and the tools to build something generational. It was grassroots wealth building and it was powerful. But none of that had mattered when she walked into Briarwood. The next morning, the fire she hadn't meant to light spread faster than she could have predicted. Civil rights groups began sharing the video. Influential voices reposted it. News outlets reached out. By lunchtime, the boardroom at Briarwood National was in full panic mode. Their public relations manager scrambled together and "We are investigating this incident" tweet. But the internet wasn't having it. What no one at the bank had counted on was Monica's background. Not just her resume but her reach. Emails began surfacing. Former students she'd mentored now working at rival banks shared quiet solidarity. One compliance officer from within Briarwood itself sent an anonymous message. "What happened to you isn't isolated. It's just finally visible." By Wednesday, Monica was invited to speak on a national financial equity podcast. She agreed not because she wanted attention, but because the narrative was already out of her hands. If her experience was going to be dissected, she was going to at least frame it truthfully. She didn't rage on air. She didn't name the teller. What she did was worse for the bank's image. She stayed calm, rational, articulate. She talked about policy gaps, unconscious bias, and the damage of defaulting to suspicion when faced with someone who doesn't fit the internal template of safe. She outlined the exact training she had delivered. Trainings ignored, trainings dismissed as optional. When the episode aired, it went viral again, but not just with anger. People were inspired. They were educated. Some were ashamed. "I work in finance and this made me rethink everything," one listener wrote. Another, "She doesn't just speak truth. She teaches it." Still, behind the scenes, Monica struggled. Not with guilt, she'd done nothing wrong, but with exhaustion. The praise felt hollow when it came from people who had remained silent until it was trending. The apologies, though well-meaning, couldn't erase what it felt like to be judged so swiftly. The irony stung deeper than she let on. That bank had once contracted her to help them diversify their hiring pipeline. She remembered the pitch. She remembered the boardroom, the coffee, the empty nods. She remembered the training deck she'd built, slide 17 in particular. It was titled Trust and Perception, the Cost of Getting It Wrong. They had gotten it wrong, and this time it was public. A week later, Briarwood issued a formal apology. It was long, carefully worded, and deeply vetted by attorneys. It acknowledged missteps in procedure and an unfortunate breakdown in internal protocol, but it never used the words racial profiling. Monica read it once, then again. Then she closed her laptop and went outside. She walked to the community center 2 blocks from her office, where she was scheduled to teach a workshop on small business budgeting. When she arrived, there were twice as many people as usual. Some were there because of the video. Others just needed help. She smiled, stepped to the front of the room, and began. That was the part of her story no one reported. That even after the spotlight faded, even after the headlines cooled, Monica Ellison went right back to doing what she'd always done, showing up. Not because of what they did to her, but in spite of it. And that, more than any credential, was the power they never thought to check. The air inside Briarwood's headquarters had grown heavier by the hour. What began as a small internal concern had now become a national embarrassment. News outlets weren't just quoting Monica Ellison. They were quoting her clients, her students, her impact. And worse for the bank, people on the inside had begun to whisper. At first, it was quiet discomfort, a glance exchanged between tellers. A meeting filled with unusually long silences. But soon the murmurs turned into messages. One branch manager in Cleveland emailed HR requesting a review of racial bias training. Another employee in San Diego reached out to Monica directly, anonymously, sharing her own experience of seeing customers of color treated with less patience and more suspicion. Then the silence broke completely. It started with a letter, typed, signed, leaked, a joint statement penned by a dozen mid-level employees across departments. "We can no longer remain silent," it began. "We watched what happened to Monica Ellison, a woman we should have been learning from, not policing. Our institution failed her and by extension failed the communities we claim to serve." It was posted on a private employee message board first, but nothing online stays private for long. By morning it had been shared over 10,000 times. Monica, seated at a corner cafe table that same day, read the statement in full. She didn't know the names on the bottom of the letter, at least not personally, but she recognized the tone. It was the same tone she'd carried for years, measured, clear, and resolute. It sounded like people who had had enough of complicity. The letter created a ripple. More employees stepped forward. Some shared screenshots of internal memos that contradicted the bank's public statements. Others posted their own experiences being discouraged from approving suspicious deposits, being warned to be cautious with unusual clientele. By the end of that week, Briarwood's board had convened an emergency meeting. But outside of corporate offices and PR departments, something even more powerful was happening. People were talking in living rooms, barbershops, community centers. Stories poured out. It turned out that Monica's experience wasn't rare. It was just visible. There was the black nurse in Kansas City denied a car loan despite perfect credit. The Latino entrepreneur in Houston asked for extra documentation, just in case. A Vietnamese grocer in Seattle whose cash deposits were flagged repeatedly for no stated reason. And these weren't fringe anecdotes anymore. These were patterns. Monica was flooded with interview requests, but she didn't accept all of them. She chose carefully. When she did speak, she redirected the focus not to her own dignity, but to a deeper, more uncomfortable truth. The systems weren't broken. They were working exactly as designed. That line caught fire. She said it gently without malice, but it burned. Soon, other institutions began taking notice. A credit union in Minneapolis reached out to partner with Monica on inclusive training models. A private bank in New Orleans offered to host community listening sessions. Local chapters of the National Urban League and NAACP reached out to collaborate. The irony wasn't lost on Monica. She hadn't asked to become the face of anything. All she had done was walk into a bank with her own money, trying to build something honest. What followed wasn't some heroic crusade. It was just the aftermath of truth being too loud to ignore. And in the quiet between emails, media calls, and workshops, she found herself returning again and again to the same memory. The moment at that teller's window, the suspicion in the clerk's eyes, the chill in the air when the officer arrived, the tightness in her throat when she realized yet again that she had to defend her right to belong. That was the part the headlines never captured, the personal toll, the weight of being disbelieved in broad daylight. But now that weight was shifting because voices were rising to meet it. A former colleague of Monica's, Danielle Hart, who had once been the youngest black branch manager in Briarwood's Texas district, published an op-ed. "We didn't speak up when we should have. We told ourselves it wasn't our battle." But Monica didn't just get humiliated. She reminded us of our own silence. "And I won't be silent anymore." That piece was reprinted in Forbes and The Atlantic. At the same time, Monica received a letter, handwritten, no return address. "I was the teller," it said. It was short, shaky, and full of remorse. "I froze. I made assumptions. I let fear replace judgment. I've resigned. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. I see you now." Monica read it twice. Then she tucked it into a drawer beside other letters from clients she'd helped over the years. Not out of forgiveness, not out of anger, but because even in silence some things shift when they're finally acknowledged. That week, Monica led a panel discussion at a local university. The topic: Trust and Transformation in Financial Systems. The audience was filled with young people, students of color, first-generation entrepreneurs, and aspiring policymakers. Near the end, a student raised her hand. "How do you keep doing this?" she asked. "Even when it feels like nothing changes?" Monica paused. "Because things do change," she said quietly. "Not all at once. Not always loudly, but silence only stays powerful until someone breaks it." And on that day someone had. Many had, including her. The first time Monica Ellison stood at a podium after the incident, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the strange collision of vulnerability and visibility. She had spent her entire life helping others find financial clarity, coaching rising professionals through the intricacies of wealth building and trust. But now the very system she had built a career within had cast her out for simply existing in it while black. What happened to her was a spark. But what came next was a mirror, and Monica was done seeing only her reflection in it. She wanted others to look too. A month after the event, she agreed to a speaking engagement hosted by the National Association of Community Banking Leaders in Chicago. She almost didn't accept. Her inbox was still flooded with requests, but most wanted her pain, not her perspective. This was different. They didn't want to feature her story. They wanted to learn. She stepped on stage with a simple slide behind her. "Not just my story, a systemic lens." And then she began, not with statistics, not with outrage, but with a photograph. A photo of a bank lobby. Any bank, generic, ordinary. "This," she said, pointing behind her, "is the scene of the crime. Not the kind that leaves bloodstains or broken windows, but the kind that robs people of trust, confidence, and access. And you don't need a weapon for that. Just a policy no one questions. A face no one believes in silence." The room didn't stir. She went on. Monica began to explain how implicit bias embeds itself into customer service procedures, how suspicious activity is often shorthand for something about this person feels different. She broke down case studies of clients being reported not because they did something wrong, but because someone felt they didn't belong. Then she did something bold. She opened up her own case file. Screenshots from the incident, the timestamp from the surveillance footage, even the deposit slip. The very one that had triggered the suspicion. The silence in the room deepened. These weren't just data points. These were receipts, literal and emotional. And then she turned the lens. She spoke directly to the room. To everyone here who has worked at a bank, managed one, trained staff, I am not your enemy. I'm your wake-up call. That line didn't just land. It resonated. By the end of the talk, people weren't clapping out of politeness. They stood. Not for applause, but as an unspoken acknowledgement. We've missed this. We've missed the whole point. Afterward, an older white man approached her. He was wearing a faded name badge and introduced himself as a regional compliance officer from a credit union in Arkansas. He looked uncomfortable but determined. I never thought about how often I questioned people like you and didn't think twice. Not because I hated anyone, just because I didn't know I was doing it. That's on me. Monica nodded. It's not about guilt, she said. It's about responsibility. The next week her phone rang again. This time from someone unexpected. A junior branch manager named Amy Kim working at a local bank in Portland. Amy had seen Monica's talk online, shared by a professor at her alma mater. She wasn't calling for press. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to ask, how do we fix this from the inside? That was the moment Monica knew something was shifting. Not fast, not everywhere, but real. She began to collaborate with teams like Amy's. Small, often younger professionals within the industry who had long felt something was wrong, but didn't know how to name it. Monica gave them the words, the frameworks, the tools. She built workshops not just about racism in banking but about rebuilding trust. Not just policies but people. And as her reach grew, so did the discomfort. Some executives rolled their eyes. Some PR managers tried to co-opt her message into bland diversity slogans. But Monica stayed the course. She refused to let her work be reduced to inclusion optics. Instead, she created what she called the empathy table, a model where community members could sit down with bankers, not to argue but to tell their stories. No cameras, no press, just presence. The first one took place in a small library room in Atlanta. Monica sat at the center, watching a young black father explain how he was denied a mortgage loan despite a stellar credit score. Beside him, a Latina business owner recounted how she was offered a lower credit line than her white male partner, even though she had better revenue projections. Across from them sat two bankers, both visibly shaken. By the end, no one had raised their voice, but something had broken. Later, one of the bankers, a woman in her 50s, asked Monica quietly, "Why did no one ever teach us this?" Monica smiled, tired but kind. "Because for some of us, it's not theory. It's Tuesday." In reversing the lens, Monica wasn't just correcting the wrong done to her. She was asking the industry to look again and to really see, because the truth was simple and urgent. When you treat suspicion as policy and race as risk, you don't just damage reputations, you damage lives. And the only way to stop that cycle was to unlearn it from the inside out. One story at a time. One face, one room, one table. Monica Allison didn't plan to become a symbol. She was a woman who simply walked into a bank with purpose, hoping to make a deposit. But what the world saw and what it refused to ignore was something far more profound. The incident had become more than a moment of racial bias. It had become a mirror. And Monica stood at its center, not because she asked for attention, but because silence was no longer an option. In the weeks following her viral story, something changed, not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly, persistently. People began to reach out, not just to praise her but to connect, to examine their own institutions, to share their own stories of being doubted, dismissed, or profiled in spaces that promised security and professionalism. In Boston, a young Vietnamese entrepreneur who had once been questioned over her business account sent Monica a message. "I didn't even know how wrong it was until I read your story. Thank you for giving it language." In Phoenix, a black couple who had been denied a refinance loan despite qualifying posted a video crediting Monica for helping them pursue legal recourse. "Your courage made us rethink what we were told to accept." But the true shift came when institutions began to speak out too, not as damage control but as a reckoning. One by one, banks across the country began inviting Monica to consult, not for optics but for real reform. A mid-size credit union in Minneapolis replaced its entire suspicious activity protocol with her community-led framework. A banking school in Chicago added her material to its core ethics curriculum. An old colleague of Monica's, a white woman who once dismissed racial training as uncomfortable and unnecessary, sent her a letter handwritten in blue ink. I was wrong. Thank you for not being quiet. Monica didn't chase media appearances. She chose rooms that allowed dialogue, not just spotlight. She declined panels that only wanted her trauma and accepted those willing to confront theirs. And slowly, what began as a storm around one bank lobby in Charleston spread across the country in ripples that became waves. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a movement of ordinary people who refused to be quietly suspected in public, denied in private, or made to feel like guests in institutions their taxes and trust helped build. What Monica did, what she chose to do, was model a new kind of leadership. One rooted not in aggression but in insistence. She didn't fight to be treated like a queen. She fought to be treated like everyone else. And that's what moved people. Her final speaking engagement of the year was at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Equity in Finance Summit in Washington, D.C. She stood on a stage larger than any before, a screen behind her reading in bold letters, "Dignity isn't a luxury." "The moment I was treated like a threat instead of a client," she told the room, "something inside me cracked. But what broke wasn't my dignity. It was the illusion that being good at your job protects you from prejudice. It doesn't. Only accountability does. Only policy does. Only the will to see it and fix it does." They rose when she finished. Not out of politeness, but because something in her voice had made it impossible not to. Outside, as she stepped into a cold December wind, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. She didn't say much, just held Monica's hand and whispered, "Thank you. You made me brave." That was the moment Monica finally understood what she had created. Not a moment. A movement. A movement built on the radical idea that respect isn't earned by degrees or titles, but owed as a baseline of human interaction. A movement where being black or brown or different doesn't mean you're suspicious. It means you're seen. And in that movement, Monica Ellison stood not at the center, but alongside thousands. No spotlight, no pedestal, just a place at the table where everyone belonged. Monica Ellison never expected that a simple bank visit, one she'd made dozens of times before, would unravel into a national conversation about dignity, identity, and the quiet harm of assumption. She walked in that morning holding nothing but professionalism and purpose. She walked out not just as a victim of bias, but as a beacon for those who had long learned to keep their heads down, to say nothing, to endure. Her story began with suspicion. A woman of color holding cash was all it took to trigger alarm bells. No questions asked, no credentials checked, just assumptions, a call to the police, a wave of embarrassment, a moment that might have ended in silence if Monica had chosen to just walk away. But she didn't. And because she didn't, we learned her story wasn't just about what happened in that bank. It was about what happens every day in places that claim to serve all but fail some. It was about the quiet discrimination that doesn't scream with slurs but whispers in protocol and glances, in rules that bend for some and break others. What no one in that bank knew, what they never bothered to learn, was that Monica Ellison wasn't just a customer. She was a financial strategist, a mentor, a woman who had trained others in the very systems she was now being penalized by. The irony was bitter. But it was also revealing. Even excellence is no shield when your skin color rewrites your story before you speak. And yet Monica didn't just reclaim her narrative. She reframed the entire moment. When the footage surfaced, when the story spread, she didn't chase revenge. She chose response. She turned pain into policy. She led workshops. She changed training manuals. She stepped into rooms where decisions are made and asked one simple question: what if it had been your daughter? The ripple effects were powerful. Banks re-examined their bias protocols. Executives reached out. The very institutions that once dismissed stories like hers now sought her wisdom to rewrite them. And people, thousands of people, felt seen, heard, and emboldened. But more than policy, Monica brought forward a truth we all need to remember. You don't have to be loud to be brave. You don't have to burn everything down to build something better. Sometimes courage looks like a calm voice in a tense room. Sometimes it looks like saying, "This isn't right," when everyone else stays silent. So what can we take from Monica's story? We can learn to listen before judging. We can learn to check our reflexes, the ones taught by fear, reinforced by media, inherited through culture. We can teach our children that titles don't define people and neither does color. We can remind our institutions that serving the public means all the public. And we can remember that integrity isn't a performance. It's a practice lived daily in how we treat the people who can't give us anything in return. Monica Ellison's story reminds us that respect is not a luxury. It's a right. One we must defend not just in viral moments but in everyday ones. At counters, on sidewalks, in classrooms and boardrooms. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or reflect, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that challenge, inspire, and uplift. Share Monica's journey. Talk about it. Use it. Let it be a mirror and a map. Because someone somewhere is still walking into a room they've already been judged in. And maybe, just maybe, your voice will be the one that helps them walk out with their dignity intact.